Hello, everybody. My name is Lindsay Bryan Podvin. I'm the founder and CEO of Mind Money Balance. And today I wanted to bring on a guest to talk about the more practical side of a series of questions that so many people wonder about, which is student loans. For folks who don't know what you do, could you give us a little rundown of what LoanSense does?
We are a tech-enabled student loan advisory that basically answers all the questions other financial professionals can't. We assign to you a highly trained student loan advisor who will walk you through a comprehensive plan that not just helps with your student loans, but can answer the implications of these student loans on other financial decisions like taking a job, buying a house, what happens to your taxes, what happens if you get married, what is the best time to file. But what the best part of what we do is we not just give you that personalized plan, we help you file and manage your paperwork into the federal programs if you decide that's the best route to take for you.
Okay, so the next few questions I have are from the folks who are in the mental health or healthcare space and they are self-employed. So the self-employed folks are wondering, look, I know I won't qualify for public student loan forgiveness because I don't work in a nonprofit industry. What are some other options I can look into to reduce my federal student loan burden?
Okay, so if you're still, because I know a lot of people still, even though they don't work, especially in social work, you don't work in a nonprofit, but you still do, public service work, right? You might work with people with sliding scales. You might work, who knows? You might do things that are considered public service. So if that's the case, I'm not saying everyone should do this, but if that's the case, there's a couple things. Number one, either associating yourself with a nonprofit who, if you give enough hours to, they'll have a willingness to sign your public service loan forgiveness paperwork, or you can consider forming your own nonprofit.
Oh,
those are a few things if you're already doing public service loan work, right? I'm not public service work. I'm not saying you should do this if you're in a private practice seeing only private clients. I'm not promoting to do illegal things, but
Right.
I am promoting to think about if you are already doing public service work, just because you work for an agency or something, or you're self-employed and you work for an agency, that doesn't mean you're not doing public service work. You could be doing public service work. And so if you are looking into those opportunities, right? The second thing is, even if you don't get public service loan forgiveness, there is regular loan forgiveness. So what I would recommend, even public servants, is our loan advisors, when you meet with them, they will give you quote unquote what's called pro tips. And there are so many legal ways to get $0 payments, including like filing your forms between jobs, because that's considered a drop in income. If you file it, you get $0 for that year. And then you can still get an amount that you're not paying, that you're using those funds to pay towards other goals. You can still get loan forgiveness. So it totally depends on what your ultimate strategy is, what is your financial capability, and what is your comfort level of holding on to debt. It's completely individualized. We don't judge people for whatever decision they need to make for themselves, but there are still options out there. You don't have to only work for a nonprofit. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense and so helpful. So staying in the self-employed realm, but shifting a little bit to physicians, somebody asked, what about a self-employed healthcare provider? Can they qualify for NHSC?
Okay, so NHSC, we've helped several people apply to those programs. You don't have to only be a physician. A lot of, in the state of Michigan, for example, social workers, if they work for hospitals or healthcare clinics in specific areas that work with predominantly Medicaid patients, they can get up to $200,000 of loan forgiveness. So it's not just you have to be a physician, number one. Number two, you could be a social worker and get it. So if you really have a high amount of debt, look into those programs. It may be worth going to work somewhere for 2 years plus, depending on the program and the area, in order to get those forgiveness programs, right? So I wanted to say that most of the time, in order to get access to the NHSC programs, It's generally by working for an endorsed organization. The Health and Human Services have these endorsed facilities. Generally, you have to work for those in order to be considered for the program. So if you're like a self-employed person, not associated with the organizations that the Health and Human Services kind of endorse for this program, then you can't use those programs.
Got it.
But it's worth looking into, and it's worth considering applying to facilities that do get endorsed for these programs, because it could mean a significant amount of loan forgiveness within a very short amount of time.
So the next question comes from someone who is trying to make a difficult choice. They say, should I take a low-paying job that meets criteria for public student loan forgiveness? The low-paying job is about a $45,000 annual salary, and this person's student loans are around $40,000. So I think that's a really good question of, is it worth it to take a low-paying job in the hopes that they meet criteria for public student loan forgiveness, or seek out a higher paying job and work on paying those loans without getting public student loan forgiveness? So what's your hot take on this one?
So this is an analysis our student loan advisors help people do very regularly. And I believe I also have a video on this, although it's a little dated in terms of I did it a while ago. But this is a decision our student loan advisors help people make. And I can't give you a blanket yes or no, because it's an analysis, right?
Sure.
And this is the analysis of the two things to think about. In a decision, there's always what is the cost of the decision versus the cost of not making the decision, right? You have to balance both, because a lot of people only focus on the cost of making the decision, and they don't focus on the cost of not making the decision, which is called an opportunity cost, right?
Right.
So how I think about this is calculate, number one, and you could use our software to start this analysis for completely free, because you get that preliminary student loan analysis. Calculate what is your projected amount of forgiveness, right? Number one, over 10 years, versus what is the amount of salary gain you will experience over those 10 years. And I know there are projections, but let's say, for example, let's say in this case, if you owe $40,000 of student loans and you make 45, your amount of monthly payment reduction will be fairly low, because it's called debt to income. Your student loan debt divided by your annual income is below 1, as in 45 divided by 45 is, I mean, if you make 40, right? Or you make 45, I think that the equation
Correct.
is 45 divided by 45 is 1. So 40 divided by 45 is less than 1. That means that your monthly payment reduction by going on to PSLF is going to be fairly low, which means you have to calculate over 10 years, or even this year. Let's say you only know this year, I'm going to reduce my monthly payment from going on an income-based plan, or income-driven plan rather, let's say by $100 a month. I'm just going to make it an easy, simple calculation.
Yeah.
You're going to save $1,200. Okay. That's it. So if your salary, the threshold is super low. So if your salary, if you are foregoing a $60,000 annual job, it's just not worth it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas some people might have like $120,000 of student loan debt, and their reduction will be much, much, much greater. So it's in a matter of calculating, how much will I save this year versus how much am I losing by not taking this job, right? And so that's how you make the decision. Understand how much you're saving on your student loans versus how much are you foregoing in that job.
Yeah.
And for everybody, that number will be different, because they're getting different amount of student loan savings and they're foregoing a different amount in their job.
Yeah.
One final thing I wanted to say, in our economic analysis, we can never account for the pride and joy of doing a job. There is no number we can put to that. So if you say, I will be 10 times happier at this nonprofit job despite earning less than if I went to that corporate job that had me doing this thing I hated, that is not in the economic calculation. You have to almost think about, what number would I assign it, if you want to include that in your analysis, in the nonprofit versus the corporate. For all I know, you might really enjoy that corporate job and not the nonprofit job. So I'm not saying it has to be one way, but just think about that, because that's something an economic analysis can never account for you personally, right? What do you enjoy and what brings a lot of reward to your work? That is very individualized.
I so appreciate both sides of that analysis. One is the numbers side, of course, and then the other is, taking a job that brings you a level of fulfillment. So it sounds like obviously you can't advise based on not knowing all of these things, but in this case, it doesn't make a ton of financial sense to take a very low paying job when relatively speaking, their loans are pretty low. Okay.